Hey, this is your man Tony Wiggins with another edition of Locked On Jaguars here on a Thursday. I'm going to tell you today why I think it's very, very important why we tell the truth about athletes and why we don't sugarcoat their accomplishments, but we don't poo poo them either. And I'll do it here on the Thursday edition of Locked On Jaguars in just a second.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, good people? It's Tony Wiggins here on Locked On Jaguars. Thanking you for making us your first listen every single day because it's your team every day. And we're glad to have you here watching us on our free platforms. That's right. It's free on every platform. You don't have to pay for it. Make sure you like and subscribe on the YouTube page while you're at it. Listen, a lot of talk has come out recently about the legacy of certain players. First of all, I'm going to have my opinion and I'm going to state my opinion. But it doesn't mean that my opinion of players and athletes is universally the truth. All right, it's just my ingredient that I pour in this big pot of opinionated gumbo about sports. That at some point, when you taste it, I hope the flavor is good. I'm not trying to overwhelm the pot. I'm not trying to be the star ingredient, if you will, just because I have an opinion. But I do think if your opinion is one of the ingredients and you don't put it in, it could be a bay leaf, it could be salt, it could be garlic, it could be whatever, that it has an effect on how that pot tastes, which has an overall bearing on how it's remembered, right? So just to say that, I want to say this. I'm not going to beat anybody up about how they feel about certain players, but I will tell you how if we don't eventually tell the truth about stuff, how long term, when you look back, it'll have a profound effect on how people are remembered in sports, specifically Fred Taylor and Jimmy Smith as it pertains to Jacksonville. Um, Tony Boselli was a little bit different because I don't think anyone denied the fact that Tony was having a great career. I think people were hesitant to put Tony in because of the length of his career, even though there were other guys like Gale Sayers and um, Dwight Stevenson, Terrell Davis that had gone in the Hall of Fame who had shortened careers due to injury. I think people had a problem with trying to balance out how do you put a guy in who didn't play for a long time, even though you admit when he did play, he was a great player. Fred and Jimmy is different. And one of the reasons, I'll go with Jimmy first. Jimmy obviously is affected by, a couple of off-field incidents that he's had to overcome, and we've all been fans of him for that. Fred is victimized by the fact that there were false narratives about him based on nicknames. And they're both affected by the fact that they played on a team and for a franchise that was pretty morbid outside of 2 or 3 years and did not win enough. So people come up with these thoughts about whether or not they should be in the Hall of Fame. But I always say numbers don't lie, but they don't tell the whole truth. Well, also, sometimes you need the numbers to validate what you're saying about someone. I'm going to give you a perfect example. For much of the last decade and a half, I've been hearing people say boxing is dead. Go look up sports book numbers from Vegas the last 15 years, including last year, and find out what sport was the most bet on sport. Where did they gain most of their money? Okay. Go look at pay-per-view numbers. If you can find them, they're hard to find. And see who sold the most fights. Now, so a lot of people go, well, it's Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather hasn't fought in years now. It's not just Floyd Mayweather. If the numbers say one thing and everyone else says something else, then who's telling the truth? The numbers are based on pure consumption, that more people watch pay-per-view boxing than any other sport. The numbers suggest in Vegas that more people gamble on boxing than any other sport. The amount of money that fighters are paid in boxing is higher than other sports of similar, in similar categories. If the numbers say one thing, but people keep saying another, then at some point you have to find out the truth. I tell you what, if you had $100 million and they said you have to invest in something, if your financial advisor doesn't tell you the results of a certain sport, we're going to bet it all on this sport, and this time next year, you're going to double your money. Or we're going to bet on what everyone says, and this time next year, you're going to lose it all. You'd use the numbers to say, this is what it should be. Jimmy Smith had 10 years where he had over 1,000 yards receiving. Fred Taylor had 8 years where he averaged 4.6 yards per carry. I don't want to hear people tell me about, well, I don't know how good he was. The hell you mean you don't know how good they were? Both of them. Both of them. This is why I'm so big on people telling the truth and telling, because if you sometimes you had to be there, and sometimes even if you were there, you still need to be reminded by looking at statistics. And there are a bunch of narratives out there that's making it hard for these guys to get into the Hall of Fame. The reason I'm bringing this up was not just because of my Aaron Donald, my comments with Aaron Donald is that I think he's great. It was my way of saying, damn, he's great. Can't quite put him above LT, but I was trying to acknowledge how great he was. And I was trying to acknowledge how great he was, even mentioning it, I had to have the discussion with myself that I even had to talk to myself. Is this LT-ish? That's what that was. It wasn't me holding on to old stuff saying, well, he ain't better than the old stuff. That wasn't even the context of what I was trying to do. I was trying to say, he's so great, he has me wondering if he's overtaken LT in my mind. And my conclusion was that he had not. But it wasn't a slight at Aaron Donald. But of course, the journalism police comes out and they start saying stuff about what they thought people were trying to say. I wasn't trying to do that. What I was trying to do is have an honest conversation with myself. So it shows you how, and here's where it went left. A dude that wasn't even old enough to see LT play says he was better. That's the guy when I tweeted out, I ain't having a conversation about sports, ain't going back and forth. I'll have a conversation, but I ain't gonna go back and forth with you about something you didn't see. You understand now? So if you notice on social media, that's what happened. I'm going to talk next. I've always said players need to be some of the people that say who should play and who should not. I'm not going to go backwards on that, but I can tell you where that could go left. I'm going to explain and I'm going to talk about quarterback Matthew Stafford in the next segment. And the reason why I'm going to talk about Stafford is because this is where my thought came from. When you play for an organization that is dysfunctional, disorganized, disenfranchised, any dis you want is the opposite of good. DIS means the opposite. The opposite of good is what the Jaguars and the Detroit Lions have been for so long. When that happens, what narratives and what stories come out about you, and then when you do it on the field and disprove them the first time you get a chance, as my man Rogers from Locked On Rams, I wish I could play this for you, man, but he has a snippet where he talks about how Matthew Stafford, and shout out to him too, because that motivated me to do this today. He talks about how Matthew Stafford, in the first chance he got, when he got away from the Lions, he won. And he answered every question that anyone ever had about him. And it made me think about you guys in here in Jacksonville. And it made me think about former players that have played here. I'm going to discuss Matthew Stafford in the context of Jacksonville, and I'll do it in the next segment here on Locked On Jaguars. Now, football might be over for this season, but basketball is in full steam for both pro and college. Lots of big trades going on, lots of guys changing teams. You better get on it and find out and get on this information. And the only way you can do that to get the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next 5 coaches is going to land, to how these players are going to fit on their new team, the only place is betonline.net. And it's the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just hoops. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action at betonline.net, where the game starts. I know where you guys start every single day. It's here with me on Locked On Jaguars, and we thank you for making us your first listen. So Matthew Stafford plays, 10, 12 years or something like that in Detroit, is always considered this talented guy who just puts up numbers who can't win. I'm going to just get right to it. That was the narrative. The narrative is he ain't got it in him to be a winner. He just puts up numbers. He couldn't even win with Megatron. Like one guy. I am so sick of people naming one guy that he said that he couldn't win. He had Megatron and he couldn't win. It's not like Megatron didn't put numbers up, and it's not like Matthew Stafford didn't put numbers up while he was throwing to Megatron. So that tells you that him and Megatron were doing their job. But there were 51 other teams over there, and mostly bad coaches in a morbid organization. And folks are saying he couldn't win with Megatron as if it's basketball where you just need Jordan and maybe one more guy, or LeBron and one more guy. It doesn't work like that. And people really show how ignorant they can be when what they're really doing is protecting themselves from all of the stuff that they felt and everything that they possibly have said about an athlete. When that athlete goes somewhere else and does what Matthew Stafford did. He won big games. He won in the playoffs. He went head-to-head with some of the best and the biggest and the baddest, and he beat them. And then he won the Super Bowl on a game-winning drive where he threw a touchdown pass with less than 2 minutes to go. He did it. You guys can talk about whether he's in the hall. This ain't no T-Wig is sitting here going to bat for a guy who he thinks should be in the Hall of Fame. This ain't that. I'm not debating whether he should be in the Hall of Fame. One, because his career is not over. Okay? And there's more of the story that needs to be told. But what I'm not going to do is stand here and watch people do to Matthew Stafford what I think they did to Fred Taylor, which calling him Fragile Fred his entire career when the dude played like 7 straight years without missing a game. And to talk about Jimmy Smith, like he didn't catch all of those balls and all of those yards. And like they say about Stafford, he's only been to 1 Pro Bowl. How many Fred Taylor been to? See, this is why I won't sit here and let people do that to him, because these are the things that they do to our players from Jacksonville. He ain't never been an MVP. Yeah, okay. Most of the players that say that haven't been an MVP, right? I love Richard Sherman to death. But Jim Harbaugh said something this year, and I'm going to use it as often as I can. I'm going to try not to keep repeating it over and over again, but every time somebody gives me an opportunity to use it, I'm going to use it. You didn't play for the Detroit Lions, bro. Yeah, you had a Hall of Fame safety and another good safety and a great defensive coordinator and a great coach and Marshawn Lynch and Bennett and Bobby Wagner. You had the benefit. Harbaugh said guys are born on third base and think they hit a triple. Detroit, just like Jacksonville, and we know it here because we've heard it several times. I ain't going to Jacksonville. Don't nobody want to play there. Folks said the same thing about Detroit. So let me say, if you don't want to go there, what do you think's going on with the guys who had no choice, who are stuck there? And I like Richard Sherman, I'm telling you. But my point is before you start talking about who's in the hall, get there first. Because if I'm not mistaken, and I didn't agree with this, Patrick Peterson and Darrelle Revis said you don't do what they do. That you play a shell defense and you don't follow the number 1 receiver. The same thing that everyone kept. Jalen Ramsey got burnt the other day, and he really probably got burnt twice out of all of those plays, but he followed the best receiver or lined up one-on-one with an all-pro and then another guy in T. Higgins that's very good. And he switched sides. Those are the things that we criticize him for. People say Richard Sherman never did it. We can do this all day. Fred Taylor was a great player. Fred Taylor didn't go to very many Pro Bowls or make all pros because the team didn't win. Because when there was a guy just like Fred, whether it was Priest Holmes putting up numbers, LaDainian Tomlinson, Edgerrin James, when those guys' teams are winning, if 2 guys are equal, they're going to take the guy that plays for the winning team. That should not eliminate you from being considered great because you didn't. Who are you going to take out all of those years? I mean, if we go back and look in history, There was a time when Joe Montana, Jim Kelly, Warren Moon, Troy Aikman, Brett Favre, there was a time all those guys were playing all at one time. The reason why those guys kept alternating going to the Pro Bowl and or being all pro was because at some point, all of those guys' teams won. You cannot blame losing in Detroit solely on Matthew Stafford and then want to sit here and say he had Megatron. So Seattle missed the playoffs this year. Russell Wilson didn't make the playoffs this year, and he had DK Metcalf. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. There were times when Fred Taylor and Jimmy Smith were on the same team and they didn't make the playoffs. What does it have to do with anything? I'll tell you what it is. It's not a matter of, with a lot of these people, it's not a matter of that guy ain't good enough or he doesn't pass the eyeball test. What it is it's the narrative of, quote unquote, I can't take back what I said about a person or thought about a person now that they've won. It is the most ridiculous, self-serving thing I've ever heard. And this is not me saying that Matthew Stafford needs to be in the Hall of Fame. But what it is when folks say he doesn't pass the eyeball test, that's a lie. Because he was the number one player coming out of high school, and he was the number one player drafted in the NFL, and he's one of the 5 guys that when he throws the ball, you go, oh my God. So don't say he didn't pass the eyeball test. Just say you didn't think he was a winner. But now that he's gone to LA and won, the thing you thought he couldn't do, he did it as soon as he got out of that morbid place. You still have to stand. You got to stand, man. You got to stand 10 toes in the cement because it's what you've been saying all of these years. And he proved you wrong. And I got something coming up in the third segment for another group of people. And that group of people is, or are, the ones that say he had a stacked team. He only won because he had a stacked team. Let me tell you how ridiculous that is too. And I'm going to do it in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. All right, rolling along in segment 3 here. If I hear one more person say he had a stacked team, I'm probably going to pass out. And I'm doing this, the context of what I'm saying here, thank y'all for making us your first listen here, is these are the things that have to stop being said that are rewriting history or trying to justify your opinions about someone, because it's what happened to Fred, is what happened to Jimmy. And the second we can, okay, it's easy for us to go 4.6 yards a carry and then 10 1,000-yard seasons. And if you drop somebody off from Mars in the late 90s and early 2000s and ask them, give me the 5 best running backs and the 5 best receivers, both of those guys' names would have probably been mentioned a whole bunch of times. I'm beyond that now. We have to attack this institution. We got to chip away. I'm spraying bubbles, those bubbles that clean stuff off, on that fungi and that algae that's on top of the problem. It's the attitude of people. You want to talk about false equivalency? Listen to this one. He had a stacked team. Name me one of them that didn't. You don't think Jerry Rice and John Taylor and Roger Craig and Steve Wallace and all of those, Ronnie Lott and Charles Haley, all of these people I'm naming from the 49ers, you don't think that was a stacked team? You don't think Ty Law and Richard Seymour and Teddy Bruschi and all of those guys on defense, you don't think that was a stacked team for Tom Brady? You don't think all those receivers he had last year in Tampa and that 3 guys on the offensive line that were Pro Bowlers and 2 of them were all pros and all those dudes on defense in that front 7, you don't think that was a stacked team? You don't think Tyreek Hill and all of these dudes that play out in Kansas City, you don't think that's a stacked team? You don't think having Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, a bunch of 400-pound linemen, fast guys on defense, including Deion Sanders one year, you don't think that's a stacked team for Troy Aikman? Do you think Kurt Warner did not have a stacked team when he had Isaac Bruce, Marshall Faulk, and Torrey Holt? So we'll agree that everyone that usually wins has a stacked team. What you guys are making this false equivalency to is how the team was built. That has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not all of these guys that win Super Bowls as quarterbacks had stacked teams. You don't think Brett Favre had a stacked team? You don't think John Elway had stacked teams? What about Big Ben? Sorry, I had to cough, and y'all gonna see it on video. I don't care. You don't think these dudes have stacked teams? You're arguing that quarterbacks can't be given credit because the teams are stacked when just about every quarterback, even Trent Dilfer, had stacked teams around them. The reason why teams win Super Bowls is because they're stacked, not because they have a receiver named Megatron and nobody else. You think Russell Wilson had a stacked team with all those defenders I just mentioned and beast mode? It's a difference between arguing the merits of a guy winning a game because his team is stacked versus arguing how the team was assembled. Nobody cares how the team was assembled. Nobody. You feel me? I hope y'all understand that. There's a difference. He didn't do anything. He got traded to a team and they stacked their team. Who gives a damn how the team was put together versus whether or not he did the same thing that somebody else did on a team that was stacked too? I'm telling you, some of y'all, man, you are lucky you are not an attorney, because a judge would, every time somebody gets up and goes, objection irrelevant, a judge would say, you're right. Objection is sustained, or whatever they say. They'll never overrule an objection against you of how you guys debate and make points about stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not a guy did something that you said he couldn't do, and now you don't want to back down off of how you felt all of these years. I bet all of these years, Matthew Stafford sucks. He can't do this and he can't do that. And the second that he's put in another situation, he did it. And some guys being born on third base, meaning they go to good organizations, they played for good teams, they've played in situations where they were on TV all the time. They had great teams that had great nicknames. They had great teammates. They know what it's like to be on a win. Some of these guys have no idea what it's like to play. I don't know what it's like to play in the NFL. But some people in the NFL don't know what it's like to play for people like the Detroit Lions and the way the Jacksonville Jaguars were before 2022. And I say before 2022 because I think they've now changed, or they're trying to change. You can't begin to understand how it must feel for guys like Jimmy and Fred to know that there are guys going into Canton that they were better than, and the only reason that they're being treated this way is because of where they play and the narrative surrounding them. People giving them nicknames. People not wanting to acknowledge how good they are. And sometimes players have those biases too. At the end of the day, if Matthew Stafford finishes in the top 7 statistically in just about every category and he wins, don't let him win another one. There's going to have to be a conversation. But the conversation won't be on the merits. The conversations will be because for 12, 13 years, folks walked around thinking he was one thing, and then at the end of his career, he got a chance to go take his talent somewhere else and showed you that he was another, and you don't want to admit it. Yeah. I'm not saying he needs to be in the Hall of Fame. What I'm saying is a lot of the reasoning that I'm hearing behind what people are saying about him just doesn't make sense. The math ain't mathing. And if we don't start calling this crap out, and I said crap because I wanted to say something else, it's going to affect guys that's on your team too. It's going to affect Fred. It's going to affect Jimmy. It's going to affect other people down the line. The same people that sit there and point fingers at those players are guys that in their wildest imagination would never voluntarily go and play for that organization. Many players, regardless of where they played, Deion, Barry Sanders, Reggie White, they were so good it wouldn't have mattered. You could have put them in they could have played in Canada and they would have been great. So I don't want people to use those outliers or outliers, however you say that word, and point to them and say, well, they overcame a small market, or he overcame. Some guys are going to overcome. They were so good, it did not matter where you put them. But there are other guys that do need the perspectives aimed and in the right direction. And Matthew Stafford right now is one of them. Like I said, if you want to argue he's not a Hall of Famer to you, that's fine. But please, let's start using better reasoning for it. And please start understanding that a guy shouldn't have to battle your perception of what he is when folks will acknowledge that he plays for a dumpster fire organization before they say, I was wrong. You know what? My bad. I was wrong. It's that simple. It's that easy. What else is easy is you can go to the Locked On Bets podcast and make it easier on yourself when you make wagers. You listen to the Locked On Bets podcast hosted by your boy Q and Lee Sterling. I'm telling you, it's going to work out for you better than it would if you don't do it. Make sure you check out the Locked On Bets podcast every single time. It's wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe also. Came out on fire today, man. I just had to get it off my chest. Because just because somebody's not doing something to you, if you see them doing it to somebody else, it doesn't mean you just wait till it's your turn. They're going to do the same thing to you too. And I'm just tired of people doing this to players and having these narratives about players when it's so important that we know the truth about our athletes. It's so important that when you pass these stories along, that you make sure that it's not just your opinion about someone based on something that you don't want to admit. It's the hardest thing to admit is when you might have been wrong about something, okay? And it's really hard to admit when a person actually proves it, everything you said about them, then they go and prove it, and you still want to die on that hill. Man, y'all buck wild. Look, this is your boy Tony Wiggins, man. Thanks for joining us on the Locked On Jaguars podcast. You forgive my coughing, but you guys make sure you take care of each other, and we'll see you here tomorrow on Locked On Jaguars.